The small village of Rajgarh had always been peaceful until the day Vikram Singh arrived with his men. He was the nephew of the local landlord, known for his cruel ways and complete disregard for others. The village people feared him, because he had connections with powerful politicians and never faced consequences for his actions. Maya lived in a modest house, at the edge of the village with her elderly grandmother. She was 23 years old and worked as a teacher in the local school. Everyone in the village respected her for her kindness and dedication to educating the children. She had a gentle nature but possessed an inner strength that many didn't see at first glance. One evening, as Maya was returning home from school, she noticed Vikram and his friends blocking the narrow path. They had been drinking and were looking for trouble. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure and tried to walk past them politely. Vikram stepped directly in her path, his eyes showing clear malicious intent. She requested him to move aside, keeping her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. The other men laughed, surrounding her in a loose circle. Vikram reached out to grab her arm, but she quickly stepped back. Her mind was racing, thinking of ways to escape this dangerous situation. The sun was setting, and the path was becoming darker with each passing moment. Maya knew that screaming would be useless because Vikram's uncle owned most of the land around this area, and people were too afraid to interfere. She tried to reason with him, speaking calmly about how his family was respected in the village and how this behavior would bring them shame. But her words seemed to have no effect on him. He moved closer and she could smell the alcohol on his breath. With trembling hands, she folded them in front of her chest in a gesture of pleading. Her voice broke as she begged him not to lay a hand on her. She spoke of her grandmother waiting at home, of her students who looked up to her, of the damage this would cause to everyone involved. Tears started forming in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wanted to maintain whatever dignity she could in this terrible moment. Vikram laughed at her pleas, his friends encouraging him to continue. He ignored every word she said, treating her desperation as entertainment. His hand reached out again, this time grabbing her shoulder roughly. Maya felt her world collapsing around her. She had always believed that goodness prevailed, that speaking with respect and reason could solve problems. But in that moment she realized how wrong she had been. She pushed his hand away with more force than she knew she had. This only angered Vikram further. He raised his hand as if to strike her, and Maya closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. But instead of hitting her, he grabbed her wrist tightly, his fingers digging into her skin painfully. She struggled against his grip, but he was much stronger. Just then, an elderly farmer who had been working in a nearby field appeared on the path. Vikram reluctantly let go of Maya, not wanting a witness to his actions. He whispered threateningly in her ear that this wasn't over, that he would find her alone again. Maya ran as fast as she could, not stopping until she reached her house. Her grandmother saw her distressed state and immediately understood something terrible had happened. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at the darkness, feeling completely helpless. She knew that going to the police would be pointless because they were in Vikram's pocket. The village council wouldn't help either, as they feared his uncle's power. She felt trapped, with no way to protect herself or seek justice. Her grandmother sat beside her, holding her hand. The old woman had lived through many hardships and knew the ways of the world. She told Maya that sometimes when all doors seem closed, help comes from unexpected places. She reminded her granddaughter of her late grandfather, who had been a respected warrior in his time, and how he had always stood against injustice. Those words provided little comfort to Maya in her current situation. As the night progressed, Maya made a decision. She wouldn't let fear paralyze her. She would continue living her life, teaching her students and taking care of her grandmother. But she also knew she needed to be more careful, more aware of her surroundings. She couldn't let Vikram break her spirit, even though he had succeeded in breaking her sense of security. The next morning came too quickly. Maya woke up feeling exhausted but determined. She had to go to school because her students depended on her. As she prepared for the day, she noticed the bruises on her wrist where Vikram had grabbed her. She covered them with her sleeve, not wanting anyone to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Walking to school, she took a different route, one that was longer but more populated. She couldn't take the risk of running into Vikram again. Every shadow made her jump, every sound made her heart race. The peaceful village she had always loved now felt like a dangerous maze where threats lurked around every corner. Maya reached the school and tried to focus on teaching, but her mind kept wandering back to the previous evening. The children noticed she seemed distracted, but they were too young to understand what might be troubling their beloved teacher. She went through the motions of the day, teaching mathematics and reading, but her usual enthusiasm was missing. During lunch break, she sat alone in the classroom while the children played outside. Her colleague Priya came in to check on her. Priya had been her friend since childhood and could sense something was very wrong. Maya wanted to confide in her but feared putting her friend in danger too. She simply said she wasn't feeling well and would be fine soon. Meanwhile, Vikram was boasting to his friends about his encounter with Maya. He described her fear with pleasure, enjoying the power he felt over her. His friends encouraged him, suggesting ways he could corner her again. They treated the whole thing as a game, completely oblivious to the trauma they were causing. Vikram decided he would visit her house directly, knowing her grandmother couldn't stop him. That afternoon, as school ended, Maya lingered longer than usual. She helped the children clean up, organized books, and did every small task she could think of to delay going home. She feared what might be waiting for her on the way. Finally, when the sun was still fairly high in the sky, she gathered her courage and started walking home through the crowded market route. As she walked through the market, she heard people whispering. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity. Word had spread about Vikram's interest in her, and everyone knew what that meant. But no one offered to help. They all turned away, unwilling to face Vikram's wrath themselves. Maya felt more alone than ever, surrounded by people yet completely isolated. When she finally reached home, she found her grandmother sitting outside with an old metal box beside her. The box looked ancient, covered in dust and rust. Her grandmother's eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Maya rushed to her side, asking what was wrong. The old woman simply patted the box and said it was time to open it. Inside the box were old letters, photographs, and some military medals. Maya's grandmother began telling her stories she had never heard before. Her grandfather hadn't just been a warrior. He had been part of an elite group that protected the innocent. He had connections with other families of warriors across the region, families who still upheld the old codes of honor and justice. These were people who believed in standing up against tyranny, no matter who the tyrant was. Her grandmother explained that after her grandfather's death, she had lost contact with these families. But the bonds formed in service to justice were not easily broken. She had spent the entire night writing letters, using the old addresses she had carefully preserved in the box. She wasn't sure if anyone would respond or if these warriors still existed, but she had to try. She couldn't watch her granddaughter suffer without doing something. Maya was amazed by these revelations. She had always known her grandfather was respected, but she never knew the depth of his connections or the extent of his service. Her grandmother handed her a faded photograph showing her grandfather standing with a group of stern-looking men, all wearing similar uniforms. These were the warriors who had once sworn to protect each other's families. As evening approached, Maya helped her grandmother prepare dinner, though neither of them had much appetite. They both kept glancing at the door, expecting Vikram to appear at any moment. Every sound outside made them tense. Maya suggested they lock all the doors and windows, which they did carefully. They sat together in the dim light of a single lamp, waiting. Hours passed slowly. Maya dozed off briefly, but woke up startled by a loud banging on the door. Her heart pounded as Vikram's voice called out, demanding she open the door. He shouted that he knew she was inside and that she couldn't hide from him forever. His words were slurred, indicating he had been drinking again. His friends laughed in the background, adding to the threatening atmosphere. Maya and her grandmother held each other, saying nothing. They hoped he would leave if they didn't respond. But Vikram was persistent. He banged on the door harder, threatening to break it down. He said that her silence was making him angrier, and that she would regret not opening the door willingly. The old wooden door shook with each impact of his fists. Just when it seemed the door might give way, they heard another voice outside. It was Vikram's uncle calling him away. Apparently, there was some important matter that needed immediate attention. Vikram cursed loudly but eventually left, promising he would return the next day. His footsteps faded away, but the threat lingered in the air like a dark cloud. That night was the longest of Maya's life. She and her grandmother took turns keeping watch, though they both knew they wouldn't be able to stop Vikram if he really wanted to break in. Maya found herself thinking about running away, leaving the village and starting fresh somewhere else. But she knew that wasn't a real solution. Vikram's influence extended far beyond their village, and her grandmother was too old to travel. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maya made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened, she would face it with dignity. She wouldn't let Vikram see her broken. She would stand tall even if she stood alone. Her grandmother watched the sunrise too, whispering prayers to the gods and to her late husband, asking for protection for her beloved granddaughter. The morning birds began their songs, unaware of the human drama unfolding below. The village started waking up, people beginning their daily routines as if nothing was wrong. Maya prepared for school again, knowing she had to maintain some normalcy in her life. But both she and her grandmother knew that today would bring something different. They could feel it in the air, a change coming their way, though they didn't know what form it would take. Maya decided not to go to school that day. Something in her gut told her to stay home with her grandmother. They spent the morning in nervous anticipation, cleaning the house to keep themselves occupied. Every few minutes, one of them would peek out the window, watching the road for any sign of Vikram or his men. The village seemed unusually quiet, as if holding its breath. Around mid-morning, they heard vehicles approaching. Maya's heart sank, thinking Vikram had returned with reinforcements. But as she looked out, she saw something unexpected. Several jeeps and motorcycles were entering the village, but these weren't Vikram's usual companions. These men looked different, more disciplined, with an air of authority that came from years of training and service. The vehicles stopped at various points in the village, and men began stepping out. They were dressed simply but carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. Some were young, others showed signs of age, but all had the same determined look in their eyes. They started asking villagers for directions to Maya's house. The confused villagers pointed the way, wondering who these strangers were. Maya's grandmother heard the commotion and came to the window. Her eyes widened as she recognized some of the faces from the old photographs. These were the sons and grandsons of the warriors who had served with her husband. They had received her letters and they had come. Tears streamed down her face as she realized her desperate plea had been answered far more powerfully than she had dared to hope. The warriors gathered outside Maya's house, their numbers growing as more arrived. Some had traveled hundreds of miles through the night after receiving the urgent message. The bonds of brotherhood formed by their fathers and grandfathers compelled them to act. They knocked on the door respectfully, and when Maya's grandmother opened it, several of the older men touched her feet in a traditional show of respect to an elder. The leader of the group was a man named Arjun Singh. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been a young soldier when he first met Maya's grandfather, and the old warrior had saved his life during a dangerous mission. That debt of honor extended to protecting Maya's grandfather's family, no matter the cost or distance. Arjun Singh asked Maya's grandmother to explain everything that had happened. She told them about Vikram's harassment, his threats, and the constant fear they had been living with. She showed them the bruises on Maya's wrist and described how the local authorities were too afraid to act against Vikram because of his uncle's political connections. The warriors listened in grim silence, their jaws tightening with each detail. Maya was overwhelmed by the sight of so many people coming to her aid. She had felt so alone, so powerless, and now here were 300 warriors standing in her defense. They had come from different villages, different districts, some even from other states. They were farmers, shopkeepers, ex-soldiers, and working men who had put aside their daily lives to honor an old promise and protect an innocent woman. The news of the warriors' arrival spread through the village like wildfire. People came out of their houses to see what was happening. Many were shocked and curious about who these men were and why they had come. Some of the older villagers remembered stories about Maya's grandfather and the legendary group of warriors he had been part of. They began to understand the significance of what was unfolding. Vikram's uncle heard about the gathering and became concerned. He sent some of his men to investigate and report back. When they returned with news that hundreds of armed and trained men had assembled outside Maya's house, specifically because of Vikram's actions, the landlord's face went pale. He realized his nephew had made a terrible mistake by targeting the granddaughter of a respected warrior. Meanwhile, Arjun Singh organized the warriors strategically around the village. He wasn't looking for violence, but he wanted to make it absolutely clear that Maya was under their protection. Some men were stationed near her house. others at the village entrance, and some were sent to keep watch on Vikram's uncle's property. They moved with military precision, making their presence known but maintaining discipline. The warriors also began speaking with the villagers, explaining why they had come. They talked about honor, justice, and the duty to protect the innocent. Many villagers felt ashamed that they had stood by silently while Maya was being terrorized. Some offered food and water to the warriors, expressing their support. The atmosphere in the village began to shift from fear to hope. By afternoon, the entire village knew that something significant was happening. The local police officers, who had previously ignored complaints about Vikram, suddenly became very interested in maintaining peace and order. They approached Arjun Singh carefully, asking about their intentions. He explained calmly that they were simply ensuring the safety of a vulnerable woman and her grandmother, something the police should have been doing all along. Vikram himself had not yet appeared. He was at his uncle's house being lectured about the mess he had created. His uncle was furious, not because of the wrong done to Maya, but because these warriors had the potential to destroy the family's reputation and power. He knew that many of them had connections with media, politicians, and other influential people. This wasn't just a village matter anymore. Maya watched from her window as the warriors took up their positions. She felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, relief, but also guilt that so many people had traveled so far because of her situation. Her grandmother assured her that this was exactly what her grandfather would have wanted, that protecting the innocent was the highest duty of a warrior, and that these men were honoring his memory by being here. As evening approached, Arjun Singh came to speak with Maya directly. He assured her that she was safe now, that Vikram would not dare to touch her or even look at her wrongly. He explained that they would stay as long as necessary to ensure the matter was properly resolved. He also mentioned that they had already contacted human rights organizations and journalists about the case, ensuring it would receive proper attention. Maya thanked him with tears in her eyes. She asked how she could ever repay such kindness. Arjun Singh smiled gently and said that no repayment was necessary. He told her that her grandfather had taught him the meaning of true courage and honor, and that protecting her was a way of honoring that teaching. He said that she should continue living her life, teaching her students and being the good person she was meant to be. The news of the warriors' arrival had reached beyond the village boundaries. Television news channels started showing up, intrigued by the story of 300 men traveling to protect one woman. Reporters interviewed the warriors, who spoke eloquently about honor, duty, and standing against injustice. They explained the historical bonds that connected them and how they had all dropped everything to answer a call for help from a fallen comrade's family. The media attention was something Vikram's uncle had desperately wanted to avoid. His political career depended on maintaining a respectable image, and now his nephew's actions were being broadcast across the state. Journalists were asking uncomfortable questions about why the local authorities had failed to protect Maya, and why it took the arrival of outside warriors to ensure her safety. The landlord realized he needed to do damage control immediately. By the second day, government officials started arriving in the village. The district magistrate came personally, along with senior police officers. They held meetings with Arjun Singh and other warrior leaders, trying to understand the situation and find a resolution. The officials were uncomfortable with the presence of so many organized men, but couldn't deny that they had a legitimate grievance. The state's failure to protect one of its citizens was now under public scrutiny. Maya was asked to give her statement to the authorities. With the warrior standing behind her, she felt confident enough to speak the complete truth. She described every detail of Vikram's harassment, the threats he had made, and the fear she had lived with. She also pointed out how the local police had refused to file a complaint when her grandmother had tried to approach them earlier. Her testimony was recorded carefully this time, with multiple officials present as witnesses. The pressure on Vikram's uncle increased with each passing hour. Political opponents seized the opportunity to question his integrity and fitness for office. Social media was flooded with posts about the case, with thousands of people expressing support for Maya and condemning Vikram's actions. Women's rights groups organized protests demanding justice. What had started as one man's criminal behavior had become a symbol of larger issues of power, privilege, and gender-based violence. Vikram was finally forced to appear before the police. He tried to act defiant at first, claiming that Maya was exaggerating and that he had done nothing wrong. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Several villagers who had been too afraid to speak before now came forward with their own stories of Vikram's bullying and harassment. The warriors had created a safe space where people felt protected enough to tell the truth. Arjun Singh made it clear to the authorities that the warriors would not leave until proper action was taken. He demanded that Vikram be arrested and charged, that the local police officers who had ignored Maya's complaint be investigated, and that measures be put in place to ensure such incidents didn't happen again. His demands were reasonable but firm, and the presence of media made it impossible for the officials to ignore them. The warriors maintained their disciplined presence throughout. They didn't engage in any violence or threats. Instead, they organized community meetings where they spoke about standing up against injustice and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. Many young people in the village were inspired by their message and their example of organized, peaceful, but firm action. The warriors were showing that strength didn't have to mean aggression. Maya's grandmother was deeply moved by everything happening. She spent time with many of the warriors, sharing memories of her late husband and hearing stories about how he had touched their lives or the lives of their fathers. These conversations brought both tears and smiles. It was a reunion of sorts, a reconnection of families bound by shared values and experiences. She felt her husband's presence in spirit, proud of what was unfolding. On the third day, formal charges were filed against Vikram. He was arrested and taken into custody. The speed of action was unprecedented in the area and sent a clear message that when enough people stood together for justice, even the powerful could be held accountable. The arrest was broadcast on news channels, and Maya's case became a talking point across the country about women's safety and the failure of local governance. Vikram's uncle issued a public statement, condemning his nephew's actions and expressing regret for not acting sooner. It was clearly a political move to save his own career, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that justice was being served. The landlord also announced that he would be funding a women's safety initiative in the village and contributing to Maya's educational programs. Again, it was self-serving, but Maya and the warriors decided to accept it as part of the resolution. The local police officials who had ignored Maya's complaint were suspended pending an investigation. New officers were appointed, and the superintendent of police personally assured Maya that she could approach them anytime she felt unsafe. He also announced the creation of a special helpline for reporting harassment, promising that no complaint would be ignored. These were small steps but important ones in changing the system. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the warriors began preparing to return to their homes. Their presence had achieved its purpose. Maya was safe, justice was being served, and the entire system had been shaken into action. Before leaving, they organized a gathering in the village square where Arjun Singh spoke about the importance of community and standing together against wrong. During this gathering, Arjun Singh presented Maya with her grandfather's medals and honors, which her grandmother had kept in the old box. He spoke about the legacy she carried and how she had shown tremendous courage in the face of danger. He told her that her grandfather would have been proud of her strength and dignity. The entire village witnessed this moment, and many were moved to tears. Maya addressed the gathering as well, though her voice shook with emotion. She thanked the warriors for their incredible support and for restoring her faith in humanity. She talked about how alone she had felt and how their arrival had changed everything. She also urged the villagers to learn from this experience, to stand up for each other, and to never let fear silence them when they witnessed injustice. The warriors didn't just leave behind protection for Maya. They left behind a transformed community. The village had learned that ordinary people could challenge power when they stood united. They had seen that honor and courage still existed in the world. Young boys and girls looked at the warriors with admiration, understanding that true strength meant protecting the weak, not exploiting them. Before departing, each warrior met with Maya and her grandmother personally. They exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch. They assured her that if she ever needed help again, she only had to send word. These weren't empty promises. The bonds formed through this experience were real and lasting. Maya now had a network of protectors spanning across regions, a family she hadn't known existed just days ago. The departure of the warriors was an emotional affair. The entire village gathered to see them off, many bringing small gifts and sweets as tokens of gratitude. What had started as fear and uncertainty had transformed into hope and solidarity. Children waved at the warriors, women blessed them, and men shook their hands with newfound respect. The atmosphere was completely different from when they had arrived just days ago. Maya stood with her grandmother, watching as the jeeps and motorcycles prepared to leave. Arjun Singh came to say his final goodbye. He placed his hand on Maya's head in a blessing, telling her to live without fear and to always stand for what was right. He reminded her that she carried her grandfather's blood and spirit, and that alone made her stronger than she realized. His words gave her courage that would last long after he was gone. As the convoy began to move out, villagers lined the streets, many with tears in their eyes. The warriors had not only helped Maya, but had awakened something in the entire community. People who had accepted injustice as a way of life now understood that change was possible. The sound of engines faded into the distance, but the impact of their presence would echo for generations. In the days following their departure, life in the village slowly returned to normal, but it was a different kind of normal. People walked with their heads held higher. Women felt safer. The culture of silence that had protected people like Vikram began to break down. When someone tried to bully or harass others, villagers spoke up, remembering the lesson the warriors had taught them about standing together against wrong. Maya returned to her teaching with renewed energy and purpose. Her students noticed the change in her, a confidence and strength that wasn't there before. She began incorporating lessons about courage, justice, and standing up for oneself into her teachings. The children listened with rapt attention, inspired by their teacher who had faced down a powerful enemy and emerged victorious with the help of hundreds of warriors. The legal case against Vikram proceeded through the courts. With media attention and public pressure, the justice system worked more efficiently than usual. Evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and the truth came out clearly. Vikram's lawyers tried various tactics to get him released, but the overwhelming evidence and public interest in the case made it impossible to manipulate the process as his family had done so many times before. Vikram's uncle's political career never recovered from the scandal. In the next elections, voters remembered how his family had terrorized innocent people and how it took outside intervention to bring justice. He lost his seat and with it much of his power and influence. The landlord family that had ruled the area for decades found their authority significantly diminished. It was a clear demonstration that power built on fear and oppression was ultimately fragile. Maya received messages of support from across the country. Her story had resonated with countless women who had faced similar harassment, but never found justice. She became, without intending to, a symbol of resistance and courage. Organizations working for women's rights invited her to speak at events. Though she remained humble and always credited the warriors and her grandmother for her survival and victory. Her grandmother's health, which had deteriorated during the stress of the harassment, began to improve. The old woman found peace knowing her granddaughter was safe, and that her late husband's legacy lived on through the warriors who had come to their aid. She spent her days contentedly, often looking at the old photographs and remembering better times, now mixed with new memories of honor upheld and justice served. The transformation in Maya was profound but subtle. She didn't become loud or aggressive. Instead, she developed a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had support, that she wasn't alone, and that justice was possible. She still chose her battles carefully, but she no longer lived in fear. The experience had taught her that speaking up was worth the risk, and that good people existed who would stand with her. Months passed, and Vikram was convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. The verdict was celebrated not just in Maya's village but in many communities that had followed the case. It represented a rare victory against powerful perpetrators who usually escaped consequences. The judgment specifically mentioned the failure of local authorities and ordered compensation for Maya for the trauma she had endured. The compensation money was significant, but Maya didn't keep it for herself. She used it to establish a small self-defense and legal aid center in the village. She wanted other women to have tools to protect themselves and access to justice without needing an army of warriors to come to their rescue. The center offered basic self-defense classes, legal counseling, and support groups for women facing harassment or violence. Arjun Singh and other warriors kept in touch with Maya through letters and occasional phone calls. They checked on her well-being and were pleased to hear about the center she had established. Some of them contributed financially to the center, helping it expand its services. The network of warriors, formed by their fathers and grandfathers, had found new purpose in the modern age, adapted to contemporary challenges while maintaining their core values. The village school where Maya taught began to thrive. Parents who had been indifferent about their children's education, especially daughters, now saw the value of educating young people to stand up for themselves. Enrollment increased and Maya hired 2 additional teachers. She introduced special classes on rights, dignity, and civic responsibility. Her students were learning not just academic subjects but life lessons about courage and justice. One particularly meaningful development was the formation of a youth group in the village. Young men and women, inspired by Maya's story and the warrior's example, came together to address social issues. They organized awareness campaigns about gender equality, ran cleanliness drives, and helped elderly people with their needs. They wanted to prove that their generation could build a better, more just community. Maya's relationship with the villagers also deepened. People who had once avoided getting involved now approached her with their problems, knowing she had the courage to help and connections to support her. She became an informal leader, mediating disputes, advising families, and standing up against injustice whenever she encountered it. She did all this while remaining humble and focused on her primary role as a teacher. The annual Harvest Festival that year had special significance. The village organized a tribute to Maya's grandfather and the warriors who had come to their aid. A small memorial was erected in the village square with inscriptions about honor, courage, and protecting the innocent. During the ceremony, Maya's grandmother was the chief guest, and she spoke movingly about her husband and the values he stood for, values that had saved her granddaughter. 3 years passed since the day the warriors had arrived to protect Maya. The village had transformed in ways that seemed impossible when she had first faced Vikram's harassment. What had begun as one woman's desperate plea for help had sparked a movement that changed an entire community's consciousness about justice, dignity, and standing together against oppression. Maya had grown into her role as both teacher and community leader with grace. The self-defense and legal aid center she had established was now serving not just her village, but surrounding areas as well. Women traveled from distant places to learn self-defense techniques and understand their legal rights. The center had helped dozens of women escape abusive situations and find justice. It had become a beacon of hope in a region where such resources were rare. Her grandmother had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier, content in the knowledge that Maya was safe and thriving. Before she died, she had the satisfaction of seeing her granddaughter honored by the state government for her social work. The old woman spent her final days surrounded by love, frequently visited by villagers whose lives Maya had touched. She died with a smile, reunited in spirit with her warrior husband. Maya had received numerous awards and recognition for her work, but she remained grounded. She still lived in the same modest house, still taught at the village school, and still wore simple clothes. The only visible change was the confidence in her eyes and the respect she commanded wherever she went. People sought her counsel on various matters, from family disputes to social issues, trusting her judgment and integrity. Vikram had completed his prison sentence and was released, a broken man. Prison had been harsh on him, and he had lost everything: his arrogance, his sense of entitlement, and his belief that he could act without consequences. Upon release, he left the area permanently, unable to face the shame and unwilling to encounter Maya. His uncle had also relocated, their family's legacy of dominance in the region completely dismantled. The warriors who had come to Maya's aid remained connected through what they now called the Guardian Network. They had formalized their loose association into an organization that responded to cases of injustice, particularly those involving vulnerable women and children. Maya's case had shown them that their father's legacy could continue in meaningful ways, adapted to contemporary challenges. They had helped dozens of people since then, always honoring the principles of justice and protection of the innocent. Arjun Singh had become a mentor to Maya, visiting twice a year and guiding her in expanding the center's impact. He was proud of what she had accomplished and often said that her grandfather would have been equally proud. Their relationship was that of family, bound not by blood but by shared values and mutual respect. He had introduced her to other activists and organizations, helping her build a network of support for her work. The village itself had become something of a model for surrounding areas. Government officials and social workers visited to study how a small community had transformed its approach to safety and justice. The youth group that had formed after the incident had grown into a registered organization with over 100 members. They conducted workshops in schools, organized community events promoting gender equality, and provided support to families in need. Maya had also found personal happiness. She had married a teacher from a neighboring district who shared her values and supported her work. He was a gentleman who admired her courage and worked alongside her at the center. Together they had started a family, and Maya was now a mother to a beautiful daughter whom she named after her grandmother. She was determined to raise her child in a world where women wouldn't have to beg anyone not to lay hands on them. The school where Maya taught had expanded significantly. Additional buildings had been constructed, and it now offered education up to higher secondary level. Maya had become the principal, using her position to ensure that every child, regardless of gender or economic background, received quality education. She had introduced special programs focusing on building confidence, teaching rights and responsibilities, and encouraging critical thinking. The Legal Aid Center had successfully handled over 200 cases in 3 years. Many women who had suffered in silence found their voice and sought justice. The center provided free legal consultation, helped file complaints, and ensured that cases were followed through to completion. They had established connections with lawyers, police officers, and judges who believed in their cause and worked to ensure fair treatment for all. One of the most significant achievements was the change in local law enforcement. The new police officers assigned to the area were carefully selected and trained in handling cases of harassment and violence against women. They held regular meetings with community members, building trust and ensuring that people felt comfortable reporting crimes. The culture of fear that had protected criminals like Vikram was being systematically dismantled. Maya often reflected on the night she had begged Vikram not to harm her and how he had ignored her pleas. That moment of absolute helplessness had transformed into a journey of empowerment, not just for herself but for countless others. She understood now that her grandfather's legacy wasn't just about his personal bravery, but about the network of honor and justice he had helped create, a network that had saved her and continued to protect others. The annual memorial ceremony at the village square had become a major event. Hundreds of people attended, including many of the original 300 warriors and their families. It was a celebration of courage, honor, and the power of standing together against injustice. Young children learned the stories of how their village had changed, understanding that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they acted on principles rather than fear. Maya had started writing a book about her experience, hoping to inspire others facing similar situations. She wrote about the terror she had felt, the helplessness, and then the miraculous arrival of the warriors. But more importantly, she wrote about what came after, the healing, the rebuilding, and the work of creating lasting change. She wanted readers to understand that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers, but about transforming systems and communities. The Guardian Network had grown beyond anyone's expectations. They now had members across multiple states, all connected by the values of their warrior ancestors. They had helped prevent injustices, protected vulnerable people, and worked with authorities to ensure proper action. They used modern technology to coordinate their efforts, but maintained the old codes of honor that had guided their fathers and grandfathers. Interestingly, some of Vikram's former friends had approached Maya seeking forgiveness and wanting to make amends. They had been transformed by witnessing the consequences of their actions and the courage of those who stood against them. Maya, after much thought, had allowed some of them to volunteer at the center, giving them a chance to redirect their energy toward positive change. She believed in second chances, though she remained cautious. The most touching development was when Maya received a letter from a young girl in another state. The girl had heard Maya's story and found courage to report harassment she was facing at school. With proper support, justice had been served in her case, too. The girl wrote that Maya was her hero and that she wanted to be like her when she grew up. Maya kept this letter in a special place, reading it whenever she needed motivation. Her daughter was growing up in a completely different environment than Maya had known. The little girl attended school without fear, played freely in the village, and was surrounded by people who would protect her. Maya watched her daughter run and laugh, grateful that she would never have to beg someone not to harm her, grateful that the warriors had come that day and changed everything. As Maya stood in her classroom one morning, teaching a new generation of children, she thought about the journey from that terrifying night to this moment of peace and purpose. She had learned that evil exists, but so does extraordinary goodness. She had learned that one person's cry for help could mobilize hundreds, and that the bonds of honor and justice could span generations and distances. The story of the woman who begged for mercy and was ignored, only to have 300 warriors arrive for her protection, became a legend told across the region. But for Maya, it was more than a story. It was her life, her transformation, and her mission. She had gone from victim to survivor to warrior in her own right, fighting not with weapons but with education, legal aid, and community building. Every evening, as the sun set over the village, Maya would spend a moment at the memorial in the square. She would touch the stone inscription about honor and courage, remembering her grandfather she never met, the grandmother who had saved her, and the 300 warriors who had proven that good people still existed in the world. Then she would walk home, ready to face another day of building the world she wanted her daughter to inherit. A world where no woman would ever have to beg not to be harmed, because everyone would understand that protecting the innocent was not just a duty, but the very foundation of a civilized society.